country wasn't in a great shape in 1945. Huge problems, everything that we have now, and a lot of London was in ruins. But people stood up and said, we fought for something and we want to make sure that what we fought for was worth fighting for. And these are big challenges. But the response to those was to say, let's make one of the biggest decisions that's ever been made and found the NHS. What a huge advancement for public services and for how we exist as a society to say no one should be forced to be medically bankrupt or live in pain or get substandard care because they can't afford it. As a nation, we need to support each other and work together, take on that collective risk, because when you need it, and you might not ever need it, but when you need it at your, one of your darkest moments in your life, the state will be there for you. Our country will be there for you.
This is a bit of a treat, actually. I'm outside Parliament, just by the Pankhurst Memorial, which needs no introduction, with Councillor Louise Jones, newly elected for the Labour Party in Leicestershire. But first of all, Louise, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, amazing to be here on this sunny afternoon.
And as we're stood here at the moment, in the shadow of Pankhurst, I mean, how do these kind of places make you feel?
So I think it's really important to learn about the history of our democracy, because I know for me, born in the 90s, I can take all of my rights and opportunities and privilege completely for granted, and I can think that these battles were fought and won a really, really long time ago. But actually, when you see the thread of the progress that women have made in public spaces and in politics, some victories are really quite recent. And indeed, women serving in the armed forces as well. A lot of these battles were really quite recent. So it's really good to come here and just have this perspective and, consider, what would I have done back then fighting for my rights, and what is there still to do? Have I thought about that?
Yeah, and really paved the way for you to have actually stood up to serve again in local government. And like with all our guests, what we like to do, we like to go right back to the beginning and talk about their military story. And I make it my business in pretty much all the way through the podcast to make sure I interview people from the intelligence corps. Why wouldn't I? A bit biased, declare an interest. But why did you join the army? What motivated you? And can you just tell us a little bit about your time in the armed forces?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I didn't come from a military background at all. And I think really what kind of gave me the first contact with even thinking about the military was actually quite a sad one. At my school, when I was about 18, Lieutenant Dyer, who'd served in the intelligence corps, she had been at my school, but unfortunately she passed away in Iraq. And so, we had a memorial service for her at school. And, at the time we weren't allowed to do cadets because it was a girls' school and girls weren't allowed to do cadets. So, consider that ironic that you could go to Iraq but not join the cadets. And, that was really the first time I'd ever even thought about the military. It had come across my radar. And then as I got to the last year of university, I'd sort of met a couple of people who were considering the military, primarily the Navy. And really, I just went on the website. And, with each step through the process, what kept me going was the people that I met. I was like, these people are fantastic. Yes, they've got a great sense of humour. They're just great, hardworking, the kind of person that I want to be, the kind of person that I want to work with. And, by the time I'd got through the process, because it's a long process, I'd started work as a civil servant, and again, I really enjoyed it. Was getting a lot out of it, but it's quite sedentary for a 22-year-old. And I thought, well, here's my acceptance letter to Sandhurst. The civil service ain't going anywhere. Let's give this military thing a go. And it was just a huge privilege to accept it, and then go and start at Sandhurst.
What that must have been like for your parents, though, because you'd lost someone from your school, a girl. She was really young. And from the intelligence corps, and you didn't come from a military family. How on earth did you sell that idea of serving your country and joining the army armed with all that knowledge?
So I'm very lucky. They've always been very supportive of the crazy things that I want to go and do, and they trusted my judgment, which is obviously quite flattering, really, that a 22-year-old knows what they want to go and do. And it was interesting because, some members of my family weren't very happy with me joining the military at all. They were quite from a left-wing background, and they, had experience of doing national service eons ago, and they weren't happy at all. But my parents were very supportive, and they said, look, if this is what you want to go and do, we're behind you all the way. So I was very fortunate, because not everybody gets that.
as the proud parent of a little girl, I get asked all the time, would I let her join the army? And I always say, well, actually, I'd let her join the RAF. They get treated a little bit better. But do you know what? In reflection, hearing your story, you just got to let our children do what, encourage them to do what they want to do and be independent and be there for them, I guess. And I think that's a brilliant example, given what you as a school community and as a community went through with the loss of one of your own. I mean, fair play to your parents, because I'm not sure I would have been as as supportive with that. And also, thank you for sharing Joe's memory, because I think it's our responsibility on things like this podcast, where we do talk about our fallen, to remember them and use whatever tiny little voice we have here to remember them. And we do remember her and all of those that fell from our family.
Yeah, and for me, the first I'd known of Jo was obviously when we had the memorial service. But as I went through the army and I met people that had gone through Sandhurst with her, that had served with her, and I sort of got to know her, what she was like as a person, and throughout her military service. And in the intelligence corps, we wear green shoes with mess dress in honour of her. And it was just really interesting to get to know these people, because for many people, these events aren't over. These people aren't really gone if we keep their memory alive. And she sounds like she was a really fantastic person. So I was really privileged to get to know about her.
Well, hopefully we've done our little bit today anyway. So into the army, commissioned out of Sandhurst. I mean, what was Sandhurst like? You hear lots of stories. Serve to lead, a great brand for leadership. But what did you learn at Sandhurst?
So it really is, I think, the best academy in the world for leadership. Because the range of of tests that you go through, it challenges everybody at some point. Even those who are physically fit and, every time they touch a shoe, it gets really shiny, and they know orders process before we even seem to learn about it. But, there's always something that someone struggles at. And it's also really important for teaching that, everybody brings something different to a team. And I think I really learned that in my platoon at Sandhurst, which was an all-girls platoon, as we did at the time. And, to begin with, everyone feels like they value maybe those that are good at running or, carrying weight or could, shoot better than everybody else. But as you go through Sandhurst, other qualities start to become important. And, if I was to say, who do you want with you in your dream platoon, I'd single out the girl that ran the tuck shop, because she really kept us all together as a platoon. She was there always to pick anybody up. She really was the mother to everybody. And it's that sort of, an example of leadership that I really take, which is that you don't need to be the one that can, have the most accurate aim, run the fastest, carry the most weight. Those things are important, don't get me wrong, you have to be able to do them to a good standard. But really it's somebody who cares when you're in barracks. They notice someone's down and they go and ask them how they're doing. They notice that somebody, this little nice gesture will make their day. And that, that kind of examples of leadership that you pick up, just from fellow cadets. Was just so valuable. And Sandhurst is amazing as well for giving you confidence in your own abilities. When I started Sandhurst, I didn't feel like I was good at anything. I think a lot of girls do cadets or OTC, so they already sort of know which foot goes forward when you're marching and things like that. But I didn't know any of that, and so I felt like I just wasn't learning as quickly as anybody. But as you go through Sandhurst and you do the exercises, like long reach, where you go and walk, tens of kilometres over the Black Mountains, or, you do the exercises where you don't get to sleep for a few days, or, just as simple as doing a good job as a section commander, you start to get your confidence and say, when I really push myself, I can do this. And it's true, you march off the square at the end of Sandhurst having commissioned with a real awareness of your flaws, but a real belief that when you put your mind to it, you can do it.
I was going to say, you learn a lot about yourself under that adversity, so it's clearly something you then took on. Out Sandhurst, what happened to you next in your military career after that?
So there was sort of a brief period in Germany before starting the Intelligence Corps Young Officers course, which was in Chicksands, which was fascinating, and it's sort of your last chance to not have responsibility. It's just you and your fellow young officers.
Great instructors there as well, by the way, just saying.
Yeah, of course. Obviously very fantastic instructors. And then once finished that course, it was back to Germany with 20th Armoured Infantry Brigade and 44 Military Intelligence Company to take over my first section, which is your first command in the Intelligence Corps. which was just a fantastic experience. You know, it was one of the last postings that you could get in Germany, because we were obviously, for the most part, pulling out of Germany. And, you know, all around you, it's a very historical place to serve. You know, you're in a camp that was been used since World War II and even earlier, surrounded by a lot of military infrastructure. And the atmosphere of being out there, because people can't scuttle home at the weekends, it builds a real good, strong sense of community, which I think is a real selling point of the military, that you get to be part of this really strong community. So, and you know, we just had so many different challenges coming our way, because it was such a period of flux with Army 2020, a big period of flux. And I don't think I ever had a day where I was bored. There was always something going on and a new challenge to deal with. And I learned so much of my trade, how to be an officer, look after soldiers, but how also to balance, yes, you want to do everything you can for your soldiers, but certainly a mistake that I was making as a junior commander, and I think people do, is I try to do everything for them. And it's like, no, you can't just solve a problem by trying to work harder yourself. It's about encouraging your soldiers to take ownerships of problems themselves and work harder there. And I think that's something really important for a commander to learn, that they don't fix things by working longer hours. They need to fix things by making the system work.
Yeah, work smart. And I think Germany is being described as a bit of the soul of the British Army. I think we lost a lot of that, like as you described, that they couldn't scuttle off home. You had an opportunity to build those communities and then take them out on operations as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a real shame that we've lost that culture. I think the decision to bring us back, you know, I sort of half understand the justifications at the time. You know, it was very expensive to keep, you know, a lot of us out there. We're all spending our pay packets in Germany, not in, you know, Salisbury. But certainly when you consider the way the situation's gone in Europe, I wish that we had kept it at a brigade level deployment, because it was just a fantastic culture and community out there.
And you mentioned earlier on that you were from a sort of a left-leaning family. So was there, on one side,
very
right?
Much not.
So there was perhaps all this like little political thing bubbling away from a young age, would you say?
Not like party political. Always been interested in politics and foreign affairs, but it wasn't something that I felt the need to get involved with. I was quite happy doing my public service, you know, through the civil service and through the military. And, you know, on the one side, my family were very traditional rural background, which small c conservative, which means that they vote Tory. And then the other side are the socialist union teacher miners in the ancestry side. So it was always interesting for me having, you know, different narratives within different parts of the family. But it wasn't, you know, particularly being out in Germany, of course, you know, people were exercised about the Brexit referendum, which occurred while I was out there. But it wasn't something that I thought I would ever particularly go and get involved with. You know, I was happy with my military service. Yeah.
So, but you have got involved. So I'm really interested to know that when what went wrong. Like when did that happen? Because you know, a lot of us, the chats you have in the tea room and in the mess, we are actually quite a political bunch, even if it's not party political. Certainly have opinions. We have been at the forefront of the political decisions made in places like this behind us, and therefore we have a view and we've experienced, we've had a lived life. So where did it finally dawn upon you that you had something to give to political life?
So I think throughout my time in the military, it was clear that the military was on a downward path. Resources were being constrained. You know, we would deploy on exercise and pretend to be in vehicles because the actual vehicles weren't available because they're 50 years old and need repairing. You know, I saw we go from 3 div made of 3 armoured infantry brigades to 2 now. Of course, there is the strike brigade concept as well, which is based on a vehicle that's not delivered yet. I just saw very short-sighted cuts, just really... you know, one of the most noticeable things was I just felt the sense of humour draining out of the army because everybody was so burnt out by the pace they were having to sustain. And burnout isn't very well recognised in the military. It's not very well recognised at all. And I just was looking around and got a very strong sense that something was going very badly wrong. And then when we came to the 2019 general election, I think I'd always been left-leaning, and I've certainly always voted Labour, but I'd always sort of taken it for granted, the wheel of fortune, electoral fortune will turn, and of course Labour will sit out of government for a couple of terms, but then I just thought inevitably they would get back in. And 2019 showed that there's absolutely nothing inevitable about it at all. And if you don't get involved with something that you care about and try and influence it in the direction that you want it to go, it's quite difficult to criticise it when it doesn't do that. And I very much realised that, with the military, I'd known that you have to roll up your sleeves and get involved yourself. That's a key part of being an officer, is when there's work to be done, you roll up your sleeves and you get involved. And so I knew that I was about ready to leave the army anyway. And I did, in early 2020. And at that point, I thought, right, this is something that I really care about in whatever way I can, and I thought I would just be, involved as a basic member. I was going to get involved and add my voice to the mix that said that Labour needs to go, in my opinion, in the direction of serving the working people. And so, really, as soon as I, didn't have to worry about being impartial anymore, I signed up.
Well, we first met at a Labour Party conference. I'd just done an event with Dan Jarvis and others, and we went into the Labour Friends of the Armed Forces reception, and I don't know, we just kind of gravitated towards each other, and we just had this conversation, and you struck me then, and as you do now, as someone with bags of energy and bags of drive. Is that a fair comment?
I just believe that politics can make a huge difference, and I don't mind if someone is passionately conservative or liberal Democrat, because they know that politics, decisions made here affect, many facets of your life. What always breaks my heart is people that say, oh, you're all the same, or it won't make any difference, because it's just not true. And, we face huge, we've taken some knocks recently as a country. The fallout from Brexit, that was a very difficult national discussion. People got very passionate about it. And it's been a huge change in how we work as a country. COVID, the war in Ukraine, these are huge challenges. And, if I consider that the issues that we have at the moment is that we aren't taking on big decisions and we're just making little cuts here and there and we're jabbing away and just gently, it feels to me like we've switched the engine off on an oil tanker and we're moving forward, but there's no momentum or anything like that. And I know it can be different, and it has been different. There's a bit of a cliche to bring out 1945, but the country wasn't in a great shape in 1945. Huge problems. Everything that we have now, and a lot of London was in ruins. But people stood up and said, we fought for something, and we want to make sure that what we fought for was worth fighting for. And these are big challenges. But the response to those was to say, let's make one of the biggest decisions that's ever been made and found the NHS. What a huge advancement for public services and for how we exist as a society, to say no one should be forced to be medically bankrupt or live in pain or get substandard care because they can't afford it. As a nation, we need to support each other and work together. Take on that collective risk, because when you need it, and you might not ever need it, but when you need it at your, one of your darkest moments in your life, the state will be there for you. Our country will be there for you. So when I see things like that, I think, well, why can't we make those big decisions now? So, just fundamentally, I believe that, when the British state gets going, it can get going. And there's some big challenges that we'll need big solutions to. So I'm just a believer.
I think what we just discovered there in that answer is your why. And this is something I always try and interrogate people when they say, oh, I'm interested in politics. And there are various tools I use, because sometimes it's not obvious or sometimes they don't know. So you kind of have to tease it out. I didn't have to do it with you. And you very eloquently and passionately spoke about, I guess, what you believe in. And that's driven you to actually standing up to serve again in local government, which is a thing that I always evangelise, and perhaps we get onto the parliamentary stuff in a second. But how did you find campaigning? Was there anything from your military toolbox that you thought lent into? Was it fun? Was it challenging? All those things, and now you're an elected councillor in Charnwood.
So I agree with you. I think people, there's awareness of what a council does is very low in this country, and I certainly didn't know what a parish or a district council does before I started getting involved, which is a real shame, because actually councils pretty much have a bigger impact on your day-to-day life than Westminster does. They make huge decisions, have big budgets, and normally councillors will serve part-time or in their spare time. So not, the pool of people that can really commit that time is smaller. So it's even more important that we have the right councillors in place to oversee those democratic processes. And, campaigning, it was just, I always enjoy door knocking, because you get just fascinating glimpses into people's lives and the issues and the problems that you're facing. And you don't know when you knock on a door who you're going to get. What's going on in their life. And it can be a real privilege, the kind of conversations that people have with you. And then equally, you can get somebody pointing out the issue with, the plant that's growing in the potholes. You get very small issues, but that's how people see government. What you see is what you want to change. So I always just found it a really interesting process, talking to people and finding out what it is that motivates them and what they want from their government. And I would just love for people to pay more attention to how their councils work. And because turnout was very low across the country, like roughly 30%. And, councils make a big difference to your life. So, anybody who thinks for a local election that there's not much point voting, I would say, please, if you don't want to commit to signing up to be a councillor, please at least go out to vote and make sure everybody goes out to vote, because they are so fundamental.
And it'd be remiss of us not to talk about women in politics under the shadow of Pankhurst, as we are here in the middle of Westminster, just in the beautiful Victoria Tower Gardens, which is just beside the House of Lords, for those of you who haven't visited, and I do recommend you do. But what kind of representation is it like in terms of the women in your council? Are you one of the younger ones? Are we seeing a changing face of politics? What's been your experience of women in politics?
So my council's actually slightly doing better than it really should. So we're about 75% female in the Labour group for Charnwood Borough Council, which is fantastic. But obviously at this point, you've got to have male representation as well. And there's a variety of ranges. There's a few young people. Most people, I think, are sort of later in their careers, but there are a couple of young people, and we're a relatively new group, and it is a real dynamic feel. It's interesting. Every time you put your head above the parapet, some people are going to take shots at you, of course. And there are a lot of issues that people feel very, very passionately about, which is a good thing. And so, sometimes passion, particularly online, can roll over into come across as a bit much, for example. But, I think most of it's just water off a duck's back. I think the only time it gets to me is when I feel like people are willfully misunderstanding something I've said or what I'm trying to do, and you get absolutely no one gives you a chance. If you haven't communicated clearly, no one will take the time to think, actually, has she said this outrageous, atrocious thing, or could she have meant something slightly different? Nobody gives you a moment's chance, particularly as a female. There's still... Politics brings in a vast range of people, and I'm sure you found that there are lots of different motivations. You get people who are coming in because they want to help their communities. You do get people, unfortunately, who are maybe a little bit more self-serving, and they treat it a little bit more like a game, and they're not necessarily people that are very nice to communicate with or work with or get to know. That can be quite difficult, and it's unlike working in the military, where for the most part, if you've gone through all the training, you're pretty committed, and you're somebody you can work with. Obviously not everybody's like that. So I think as a woman, I'm sort of relatively privileged, because my army background's given me thick skin, shall we say. But I think it certainly puts off a lot of women. Outside of my own council, participation by women in politics is low. It takes a lot of time. That it feels to me like there's a generation of women missing, particularly like women in their 40s and 50s. Feels like there's a whole generation missing. And so I always think, why is that? I see really capable women, who maybe, and I always say, why don't you stand up and, stand to be a councillor or go further than that? We very much hold ourselves back. We think that we have to be much better than what we are. And then occasionally I will come across, the odd guy who thinks he's God's gift. And, I'm always really envious of these people, because they've got absolutely no confidence issues at all. And I'm like, how you think you could do all of these things, and you've not done very much, or not very old, or whatever. And women, I think, find it more difficult to put themselves out there, which I think is a real shame, because there's lots of very qualified, very impressive women that it's also very unstable working in politics. Whether you're a councillor as part-time, or if you wanted to run to be an MP, if you've got a young family as a woman, I don't know how any of them do it. I just take my hat off to those that do. But again, it just feels like there's a bit of a barrier there as well.
And a fair amount of resilience required. I mean, you've just gone through a parliamentary selection process as well. Didn't work out perhaps the way you wanted it to, but with that, a fair amount of resilience. And so what was that experience like of taking it to the next level?
So that was something I entered really last minute, and I entered it primarily because it was a seat that had lots of issues that I cared about, but also there was not a single other woman going for it. And I have to admit, that kind of tipped me over. I was like, we can't just have a selection process that doesn't have a woman standing in it. So I got involved quite last minute, and I thought this is a chance to speak about the things that I'm passionate about. And the local candidate who did win it was an absolutely outstanding, fantastic candidate, and never had a chance of beating him. But if you only enter races that you think you're going to win, you won't be entering very many races at all. You'll know as an athlete, and I'm a runner as well, you enter loads of races because you like the experience, and you learn stuff from it, and you hope that you get better each time, but you don't enter it thinking that you're going to win. And I think that's a really key point, which is that just stand up and enter and get involved, and don't think that just because you didn't win that it wasn't worthwhile, or don't worry that people are going to make fun of you that you didn't win. It's like no, it's really important that you stand up, make sure that your voice is heard, because people will hear you. And like we're saying about this feels like there's a missing generation of women, and in the army as well. If these people stand up and be seen, then it inspires people like me to do the same. So I always say to everybody, just get involved, and it doesn't matter if you don't win.
I think on those sage words of advice, before we get mugged by a group of French students, possibly looking at the Pankhurst Memorial, we're certainly in some people's social media photos anyway. Perhaps they think we're really famous with this camera and microphone. I think it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. There's been some brilliant dropout bits of advice as well that have come in there, and I think you definitely would have inspired not just women, but other people from the armed forces to stand up and serve again. But before we leave, any final sort of sage, folksy wisdom, words of advice you'd like to leave us with?
I can't stress enough how important your voice is. So please just get involved on any level and make sure that voice is heard.
There you go. Thank you so much. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.